You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.
Now I need you guys to buckle up because we are now joined by two newcomers here on the old Superstar Special Spectacular. First off, our old buddy from TWIFO, Mr. Dan Gramza. Dan, welcome to our Election Night Spectacular, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really excited about being with you. It's an interesting day as far as the markets go.
That is a bit of an understatement. Yes, it is an interesting day. And also joining us, also from TWIFO land, from small cap land, we've got our old buddy, Mr. Sean Smith, the Managing Director of Derivatives Licensing over there at FTSE Russell. Mr. Smith, welcome to our Election Night Special to you as well.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be on the show, Mark. Dan, it's always a pleasure to be with you as well.
Thank you, Sean. Feel the same way.
All right, let's get into it. Like I said, we do have some polls closing pretty soon. Let's see here. At 6:30 p.m., we have a couple. We have North Carolina with 15 electoral votes. We have Ohio, a big one, with 18. They close at 6:30. That's an interesting time for such a key battleground state to close. And then West Virginia with a whopping 5 out there. Let's see if they've made any other, I think they're looking to make some calls out here. We'll wait for that. But while we're waiting for that, maybe Dan, we'll start with you. Obviously, a lot's been going on in the marketplace. This is the day that the market, and indeed the country as a whole, has been looking forward to for quite some time. What is on your radar today? What has been lighting up your tape? And what were you talking about in your 5,000 product videos over there at dangramza.com today, sir?
Well, I have to tell you, I think the market has been orderly. If you look at, actually, the last time we were all together, we talked about the possibility of how the market could start. And actually, I used the Russell as an example. And that is around 8:30, when our U.S. stock market opened, we would look for it to give us a first push to the upside. And we did see that. Actually, the Russell is kind of in a unique position right now. The S&P, NASDAQ, Dow, they all had that. If you look at a 15-minute chart, if you're listening, look at a 15-minute chart, look at around 8:30, and you'll see for about 45 minutes in the other indices, the Russell had shot out of the cannon for about 15 minutes before it pulled back. So that behavior that I've been observing since 2000 stayed consistent. And for whatever reason, maybe it's because we are having a presidential election that our system is working. And the market seems to like that. It has nothing to do with the results or who's going to win, who's not going to win. What is also interesting is that we're seeing the market maintaining certain levels that we typically don't see at this time of day. But usually around 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock is where we should look for another kick in volatility. And it's because in the past, now we're talking about the Asian time zone. It's the way I look at that. And, if we look at futures, it allows us to see how the market's absorbing information. So right now, we are in the Asia time zone. And within the next hour or two, traditionally, we would see a market reaction. I don't know if we're going to get that because we do have the ballots out there. We do have things that need to be counted that haven't been counted before. We see some states that have kind of got ready with the ballots in terms of looking at them. We have other states that said we're not going to look at them until the day of the election. So we still have that to get through. But I think it's very interesting where these indices are. They're a little bit stronger than I expected, actually. Usually you go sideways for most of the day. And here we've been kind of grinding our way up. And you know something, Mark and Sean, the thing that I find interesting is what's happening with the Russell. If you look at the Russell and you compare it to the other indices, that index right now, from my point of view, from a technical point of view, is leading the pack. So, for example, 1600 was a major potential resistance level for that market. It blew through it yesterday, and it's approaching 1650 today. If it closes above 1650, and from my point of view, I think it needs to close above that level, then technically the Russell is in an uptrend. And when it comes to the Dow, it's got to get up. Its first level, major level of resistance is 28,000. It would have to close above 28,900 to be in that technical uptrend. The NASDAQ market, 11,500 is its first major level of resistance. It would have to close above 12,000 to have that technical uptrend. And the S&P 3,400 is its major level of resistance. It's kissing that about right now, but it would have to close above 3,520, 3,510 to technically be in an uptrend. So what does that say to us? That we see these small to mid-cap companies leading the technical race right now for these indices. So I kind of find that an interesting. Sean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, of why you think it's being so responsive.
He's stunned into silence.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
that's right.
Sitting there chatting away, responding to you, Dan, like I do. And even with my internal company meetings, I mute myself and I say such great things, and then I have to say it again.
He's a genius on mute.
Yes.
I'm a genius on mute. I love it. Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that does that.
That's so funny. There's been a couple of articles out today. The market rallied, so strong today, and it's investors are looking past this election. Investors are looking past the results. They're investing, and we put out that blog after the last show in regards to the results on the last big four elections and some examples of market moves 30, 60, and 90 days past the election. And two of them the markets outperformed. Two of them were negative, and they were for mixed results of both Republicans and Democrats winning, right? So really interesting how outcomes of elections have driven various markets. So with volatility coming in, I think that investors are just looking for a calmer market. I'm not saying there's going to be a calmer market, because uncertainty brings volatility, right? So if there's uncertainty, following tonight into the next day, into the next week, and into the next month, then I think we're going to be seeing some market moves. But I think you're right. Small caps have that outperformance ability, and they're showing it right now in the Russell 2000, Dan. You're absolutely right.
Speaking of market moves, I should set the table for folks who are listening or maybe listening after the fact and want to know what was going on at the time. Like I mentioned, we were up strong in most of the major indices. Today, the S&P closed at about 33.69 or so, up about 1.75%. And as Dan mentioned, we were kissing about 3,400 here in the election time. It seemed like we're giving some of that back now. It was at about 33.84, almost 85 when Dan was making those comments. It has given some of that back now. It's about 33.80 or so. So we're still up a little bit here in the initial blush of the election, and certainly up from the close, but it's still very much in a wait-and-see environment out there. I don't know, Dan, do you agree with that notion that the investors are perhaps looking past this election, sir?
I wouldn't be surprised to see that because of the behavior we're seeing now. I think the real test of that concept will be to see how Asia and Europe react as information comes out. So, for example, typically we would see the market giving us some volatility. By 8 o'clock, typically, if you look at the last 4 presidential elections, we would have a tendency to move up. And then so that'd be Asia. In the European session, which is around 1 o'clock Chicago time, the market would have a tendency to go sideways. In other words, the election is over. The market's going to stop and catch its breath. Now let's see what's going to happen. We may not have that rhythm that we've seen in the past elections. So I think it's going to be interesting. Does the European session confirm what we're seeing here, or does it say, geez, this doesn't look so healthy, or there's too much uncertainty? And then if there is, I can see it kind of backing off. Maybe a clue that you and I are also seeing is what's happening with the dollar. If you look at the euro and the Swissy and these other currencies, Aussie dollar, British pound, Canadian dollar, they gave us a rally today. They're struggling right now, but the U.S. dollar is weaker. So we're seeing money coming away from the U.S. dollar, going into these other currencies. The issue for that is, will it be sustainable? And so I'm going to have a quick look at what's happening with that. And I think that leads over to the precious metals. We're seeing gold and silver grinding their way higher. And I think that also says something about perception. Where do people feel about this market right now? And that longer-term outlook. I think that's a great point you brought up, Sean, because, the stock markets are forward-thinking. And so it's interesting. What is the attitude, the belief that we're seeing here today?
Really interesting. I was going to quickly change the subject. I was going to throw some fun presidential facts into today's discussion just to kind of stir it up. You mind if I throw out some cool presidential trivia?
Please. Yeah, do it.
We just discovered with our previous guest that Texas hasn't gone Democrat since, I believe, 1976, and that one's in play tonight. So a lot up in the air tonight, gentlemen.
Is. Well, here's a presidential quiz question for you guys. Harry S. Truman, what does the S stand for?
Nothing.
You're very close. It does stand for nothing, but it's because his parents both fought over names that begin with the letter S, and they couldn't decide, so they agreed on just letting an initial S stand in his name.
Oh, I knew
Crazy,
he made it up. I thought he did it himself. I guess the parents made it up for him.
I got it. I'll mix those into the conversation a little later. I got a couple more fun tidbits for you.
Look at you with the little pearls. By the way, shocker of all shockers, the results are in. Trump has won West Virginia. I know, clutch your pearls, listeners. Shocking. Biden wins Vermont. Trump wins West Virginia. But yes, that's how the states are shaping up. So they're starting to have some real electoral votes. We are also still joined by the Oracle of New Hampshire himself, Mr. Matt Amberson from ORATS. Mr. Matt, sir, same question for you as I just asked to Dan and to Sean here. Do you concur with that? Do you think investors are looking past the election already, sir?
First of all, hi, Dan, and hi, Sean. Fabulous guest you have. Unbelievable. We got Andrew Giovinazzi coming on after this, and Henry Schwartz and Passarelli and Metz. Oh, my gosh. This is going to be a great show.
We got a good lineup tonight.
Yeah.
Welcome.
No, I think, my opinion is that they are thinking that Trump is going to win. That's why I think it's rallying. And I think if Biden wins, it's going to take it on the chin a little bit tomorrow. But that we'll see what happens. And with this volatility skew, I just think that they're looking past it a bit. In that there's so much volatility out there implied in the options that they expect more than just the election shenanigans out there. There's going to be a lot of it. I think investors are going to start looking more closely at earnings, I hope. And as we've talked about, Mark, the earnings moves haven't been nearly what we expected. I think they're going to look more at the economy, and I think there's going to be a big relief to get past this election and think about the things that truly matter. I mean, I know they matter, but like the election matters, but really the economy and the earnings, Mark.
Well, Dan touched on earlier some of the other products that may be feeling some impacts of the election here. We focus a lot on equity indices and indeed volatility, but hey, spoiler alert, there are some other products out there. He touched on a few. Crude, WTI, I know that's one of your favorites, coming into today, rallied throughout the day pretty much, so taking back some of the declines. If you listened to Twifo last week, you know WTI taking a bit of a drubbing. We've known for a while there that folks in the options landscape have been fading any move north of the 40 handle, but WTI coming back a little bit out here. Also, we're seeing right now, vol, we talked about this for a while, vol is pretty juicy. I think I said it was close to a 60 out there in WTI on our Twifo show last week. It's in pretty much the upper bound of a 1 standard deviation move for the last 3 months in pretty much gold and silver and in WTI. So vol looking pretty juicy out there. Vol also juicy in the treasuries. I mean, again, Treasury vol is a little bit of a, take you with a bit of a grain of salt. You're talking not a lot of vol, but what vol is there is pretty juicy. It also depends where you look out there as well. Let's look at, the Ultra T-Bond, for example. We're seeing interesting bids to the calls. That's the first time we've seen the calls bid over the puts in the skew out there since the end of July. So maybe some folks betting on a little bit of reversion to the upside there. And I know, Mr. Matt, you're a big fan of all things crypto. You got some breaking price action in the crypto land for us, sir.
Yeah, Bitcoin's up 3.5%, up at 14,000. That's interesting. I mean, and another thing I'd like to say about the market, when back in 2000, when it was Bush and the inventor of the internet,
Gore,
Mr. Gore, when the votes were counted, they didn't come up with a winner, and the market went down, sold off from 142 back then for SPY down to the 90s a year later. So people don't want a contestant election. That's what that tells me. And plus it was shifting from a Democrat 8 years to a Republican. I think that shakes things up. Investors don't like that. So. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting coming up. If Biden wins, I do think it's going to go down. If Trump wins, I think it's just going to stay the course and then bring in a lot of the other factors that we've talked about before, Mark.
Yeah, Bitcoin on the rampage. On that note, Mr. Matt, I'm not sure if you had a chance to hear our crypto rundown show from earlier this week, but we profiled what I termed probably some of the craziest prints I've seen in Bitcoin options since we really started profiling them on that show almost 2 years ago. Someone came in and picked up, I believe it was 16,000 of the January. So not even going that far out, only going to January. 36,000 calls, sir. What does that do for your analysis out there in Bitcoin? I believe it was like an 87.5 vol, something crazy like that.
And the crazy thing about Bitcoin is the vol, is the historical vol, the statistical vol has been down so much more than it was for one period. It was in the 20s, which is almost unheard of. But yeah, that call skew on Bitcoin, it seems like it's just always going to be there. There are the people that are just Bitcoin fans. They don't sell it; they just buy it. They trade calls. They buy more. It's quite an asset to follow. As you know, I've been following it early. I used to give talks, and there were these anarchists.
You've sold houses for Bitcoin.
I offered my house for a Bitcoin, yeah. But I became familiar with it in the 12s and 13s when they were explaining it to me, and I'm saying, "What? How does that work?" And, if I only would have followed their advice, Mark.
God, yeah, when it was still a fraction of a dollar. Can you imagine? Yeah. A fraction of a dollar to 20,000?
It was 5 cents when I was introduced to it.
That hurts. That hurts just to hear it, sir. That's like the story of that guy who had the hard drive with a couple 100,000 Bitcoin from back when they were a fraction of a cent, and now he lost it, and they were digging through the old dump there. But Dan, we were just talking about some of the volatility and some of the impacts we're seeing in the broad spectrum of products out there, the commodities, energy, metals, crypto. I know you spent a lot of time over there at dangramza.com breaking it all down in your epic videos there, sir. In addition to the ones we just hit on, any other interesting developments or impacts or volatility you're seeing across the broad spectrum of products that you watch all day, sir?
Well, I would say regarding Bitcoin, it's one that I've also been following for a few years, and it is interesting. And, I knew a bond trader who bought them when they were like 9 cents or 10 cents. He had almost 2,000 of them.
I bet you he sold it at 12 cents because he's a trader.
No, he didn't. He bought it just as an exercise, had it on a desktop, threw out the desktop, and he lost it all. So going back to what you're talking about.
Oh, so he's exactly in that camp I just mentioned. I thought that was kind of an apocryphal story, but it sounds like there are some real examples of that.
Well, he was telling me that when it was trading at 20,000. But anyway, Bitcoin is interesting. We're above that 14,000. Ideally, I think from a trading point of view, we don't want to see it really trading back towards that 13,800, 850 or so. It's going to be interesting to see if we can maintain this upward momentum in that market. It's always tricky trying to figure out what is the driver fundamentally when it comes to Bitcoin. But some of the other markets that I do see is kind of interesting. You mentioned gold. Gold is grinding away at it over here. If we're really finding buyers because people are uncertain, and so some of that uncertain money flows towards gold, well, then we'd look for that to give us a close above 1950 within the next 3 to 4 trading days. I think if it doesn't do that, look for a sideways type move, I think, in that market. Same thing for silver. Even though it's been moving up, this is not a very strong move to the upside, so I think we have to be cautious. The market that I think in the metals that is kind of interesting, especially over the next few weeks, it's copper. Copper really does have a lot of upside potential. We're seeing some of the demand in China, which consumes about 48% of the global supply of copper. That's increasing. And the supplies are not overly abundant. So I think that's one from a longer-term point of view. I'm looking for that move to the upside. You mentioned crude oil, Mark, and excuse me, crude oil was just very cheap. You get down to $35 a barrel, that is cheap. But what's a little distracting with crude oil, even though we are moving up, it's the way we're moving up. I am not super bullish on crude, but I am bullish in the sense that I think we could easily trade between $40 and $45 for the next 2 quarters for the first half of next year. I don't see a real strong market there. We're at $40 a barrel. A lot of the shale producers are profitable at that range. We're also seeing some of the majors backing off. We saw ExxonMobil today make an announcement that they're writing off some of their shale leases that they have. They got through an acquisition. So we're seeing some shift in the majors when it comes to shale plays. But yet, we're seeing an increase in demand from China. They're now starting to buy a little more of our crude, U.S. crude. So we are seeing some increase in demand. I think the supply is still too heavy out there. So I don't look for a dramatic move, but I think higher prices from these levels would make fundamental sense in that regard. So they're kind of interesting setups. You mentioned interest rates. What I find interesting about the notes and the bonds, actually the whole yield curve, I was looking for weakness now. And what we're seeing is we're seeing a bit of a bounce. They did break lower. But now we're seeing some evidence in the Asia time zone that buyers are trying to come back in. That typically means that we're seeing a shift in capital from the way I look at it. In other words, it implies some potential weakness in those stock indices, that they may back off a bit. So it'll be interesting to see how these two pieces shift throughout the night, because I believe that's what you and I get to see when we look at all these different future sectors, is we get to see how capital shifts from one sector to another. So right now, it looks like it's coming out of the stock market. It goes someplace. And one of the places it seems to be going in the notes and the bonds. They're getting stronger right now. So it's an interesting setup. And it shows that there is some uncertainty out there. It's not as clear as it seemed just a few hours ago.
It is a very interesting setup, and that setup keeps changing. A few minutes ago, they called Virginia as well out there. So Virginia now in the category for Biden. So West Virginia, Trump gets West Virginia, and Virginia going for Biden. By the way, I didn't ask both of you. I want to get your thoughts on this. We had an interesting conversation earlier on with some of our guests, and I actually put it out to our audience. Let's see how our audience, they are actually going back and forth on this one now as well. You guys can vote. If you're listening live, you know where to go. @options is the place to go on Twitter to make your voices heard. It is still neck and neck. It is back and forth, but it is still neck and neck as more people are getting out there and voting. And I asked our guests, I'll ask you guys as well, Sean and Dan, do you think, quite simply, we will have a clear victor by the end of tonight? We asked our audience yes or no, or we kindly gave them a little bit of wiggle room. I don't know. And it's at 48.1%, just ticked again right now for yes, definitely. 44.2% for no, it will take days. And about 7.7% saying they don't know yet out there. So maybe, Dan, I'll put it to you. Do you think we're going to know what the heck the result is at the end of tonight, sir?
No. And the reason I feel that way, it's the balance that we have outstanding. And I would add one clarification of that is that it really depends on what states we're talking about in terms of not getting all those ballots counted and recorded. So, no, I don't think so because of that time lag. I wish we would, because I'd like to get this done too. But I think there's a very good chance that we won't because of that.
Yes. Mr. Sean, same question for you. Do you think we'll have an outcome by tonight? A, maybe B, will I still have a voice at the end of the night? That's a good second corollary to add to that. And then third, I think it's time for a little bit of additional presidential trivia. So have at us, sir. 3 nuggets for you to unpack.
I think we're going to know tonight. I think that the electoral votes are going to come in, and I think we're going to have a winner and a loser. But I do think that there's going to be some volatility in regards to that and some challenges. But I do think we're going to have a pretty good indication. Actual winner. So I'm kind of sitting on the fence there rather than saying we're going to have a winner and a loser because there's a high probability of challenge of the results. And I think it's because of those votes that need to still come in within the popular vote. But again, the electoral does elect the president. So I'm leaning towards there being a victor and a loser tonight. So now, was that a request for another fun presidential fact?
Yeah, I want another presidential trivia nugget, sir. Hit me.
All right. 2 elected presidents died on the exact same day. What was the date, and who were the 2 presidents?
I don't know the date, but is this the old John Adams and Jefferson thing? They died right around each other. I'm not sure.
July 4th.
Was it July 4th for them? That would be apropos.
It was July 4th.
Was it?
July 4th.
All right. See, it tagged them.
1826. It was the 50th anniversary of the approval of the Declaration of Independence, not the signing, but the approval.
And could I say something to
July
that?
July 4th. Yeah.
A lot of what they did back then is they would make these solemn bets that they wouldn't, if they had a secret, they would say, I will hold this secret for 50 years. So a lot of people think that they had a secret to divulge, and they were going to divulge it, and they were actually murdered. How about that?
Ooh.
Now that's a
good one, Matt.
And here's, you want to hear? Oh, well, and my thought behind that is, my man is Thomas Paine, and I think the secret that they were keeping.
Common Sense.
Yep. the secret that they were keeping was he wrote most of the Constitution, and so that's my. I love these conspiracy theories, and so there's one for you right there.
I like it. You're in the right state, definitely, sir. And it's almost that time, listeners. The clock is ticking. Some more polls will be closing, and we will be adding on some additional special guests to our roster here. You got about 10 seconds till the polls start closing out here. By the way, they just put South Carolina, I should note, in the column for Trump. That puts the current electoral standings now with Biden at 16 and Trump at 22. So I'll give you a little bit of a live update out here. By the way, a lot of polls closing right now. Listeners, I'll give you a quick rundown. We got Alabama closing right now with 9 electoral votes. Connecticut, my old stomping grounds. Everyone thinks Connecticut's a tiny little postage card stamp, but there's about 3 million people crammed into that postage stamp size state. So they have a lot of electoral votes. Used to have more. Now it's down to about 7. But still, a decent amount of electoral votes you can pick up for crisscrossing that postage stamp size state. Even smaller, Delaware. I wonder how that's going to go for 3 electoral votes. D.C. also has 3. Florida, a big one. They're not going to call that one for a while, I don't think. 29 electoral votes there. Illinois, where we are right now, I'd be surprised if they haven't called it already for Biden. That's at about 20 electoral votes. Maine has 4. Now, Maine has some, I think, they can play with the districts a little bit. I think certain districts can go different ways, so keep an eye on that Maine number. But it's only 4 electoral votes. Maryland, closing now, has 10 electoral votes. Massachusetts has 11. Mississippi, a whopping 6. Missouri, 10 votes. New Hampshire, 4. New Jersey, 14. Oklahoma has 7. Pennsylvania, another big one up for grabs, 20 electoral votes. Rhode Island, another one of those postage stamp size states, easy for me to say, 4 electoral votes. And good old Tennessee with 11 out there.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.